30 miles away offshore, on the island of Nantucket, a haven for readers and writers, the Nantucket Book Festival presents its answer to social distancing. I'm Jane Alexander, Nantucket Book Festival alumna, welcoming you to At Home with Authors.
Thanks for joining us. I'm Diane Rehm.
On this episode, one of America's most recognizable and thoughtful voices, Diane Rehm, whose interview program featuring leaders in politics and the arts was an NPR staple for nearly 4 decades, never went to college. She made up for it with her thirst for knowledge. She recalls being a secretary in the State Department when the man she would marry, attorney John Rehm, first noticed her.
I could sense his curiosity about me, wondering why a young secretary should have such books as The Brothers Karamazov, the essays at Alfred North Whitehead, and Of Human Bondage on her desk. But there I sat, in my free time trying to educate myself about authors I realized other educated people had read. I wanted to know more about the world, and so I read.
Diane Rehm was to be one of the Nantucket Book Festival's featured authors this summer to talk about her new book, When My Time Comes, which has a new urgency in the time of coronavirus. She joins us now from her home in Washington, D.C. Diane, welcome to At Home with Authors.
Michael, I'm delighted to be here. I was so disappointed when, because of the virus, the festival had to be canceled. So this is wonderful of you all to do.
Well, we're excited to have you here, and I just caught a glimpse of your dog Bella in back of you, but now she's sort of in there in the shot. What kind of dog is that, by the way?
She is a Havanese poodle, and she just celebrated her 2nd birthday.
Well, happy birthday to Bella. I am going to introduce you by listening to you introduce one of your favorite guests of all time. And then I want to just get your reaction, okay?
Okay.
So I'm going to hold up my iPhone and I'm going to hit play.
Thanks for joining us. I'm Diane Rehm. Most of you know Fred Rogers is the host of Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, the children's television program that's been seen for more than 3 decades on public television stations. Fred Rogers is also an ordained minister, a student of child development, and a father and grandfather. All these experiences are shared in his new book, the Mr. Rogers Parenting Book, and he joins us this hour from the studios of WQED in Pittsburgh. Well, Mr. Rogers, what a great pleasure to talk with you.
Good morning, Diane Rehm. I'm pleased to talk with you, too, here from Pittsburgh and the neighborhood of make-believe.
You know, I think you and I may have the 2 slowest voices in broadcasting.
But don't you think we need some slowness?
I do.
Some deep and simple times in this life.
Exactly.
That introduction not only says something about Mr. Rogers, but about you. What is your reaction to that?
My reaction is to tell you how beloved that man was and is. And I grew my children up listening to Mr. Rogers, watching him on television. I, as you may know, was at home for 14 years before I had anything that resembled a career, so that I would save my ironing until the end of the day after the kids had gotten home from school. And in my sewing room, I had the ironing board set up.
And I would sit the kids down in front of the television when Mr. Rogers came on. He taught us all so much about what it is to be an open, loving, accepting human being. And, Michael, the next day, and if you'd like, I can show it to you, he sent me a little book that has a mirror on the front of it. And the book is titled, You Are Special. And he signed it, Love, Fred Rogers.
Let me come to what he mentioned and what you mentioned actually with him about you two being slow talkers. Tell me about your slow talking.
Well, at one point in my life, I talked a lot more quickly than I do now. In fact, listening back to some of the interviews I did early in my career, I'm sort of shocked by what I hear because it sounds so fast. It sounds very much the way you hear young people talking now, with a much more rapid pace. And then after I got a diagnosis of spasmodic dysphonia in 1998, I had been having some problems and couldn't find a diagnosis. Finally, after 6 years, a neurologist and an otolaryngologist diagnosed me with spasmodic dysphonia, for which to this day I receive Botox injections once or twice a year right into my vocal cord from the outside of the neck. I received those out in Portland, Oregon, where the doctor who first diagnosed me at Johns Hopkins now practices. And therefore, my voice has gotten progressively slower as time has gone on.
Has there been an advantage, do you think, for you to have a slower voice?
Well, it's interesting because so many people say to me, and the head of NPR once said, she has the most recognizable voice on radio anywhere. So, what can I say? I don't think it was actually turning lemons into lemonade, but I guess people got used to it and found in it perhaps some measure of their own fragility, some measure of their own less than perfection life or being or looks or sound, and perhaps could identify with me in that way and came to accept me. So, of course, I was so worried that once this all began, the program directors of NPR across the country would say, she's got to get off the air. And many people did say that. Oh my God, what is this woman doing on the air? But the program directors held fast and told people to concentrate on the content. And they did, and we got through it.
You used one word in your answer there, which really resonates very loudly at this moment, fragility. And it sounds like you have been maybe hyper aware of this concept of fragility for a long time. How does that apply to your set of lenses now during the coronavirus pandemic?
You know, this morning I streamed the Palm Sunday service from the cathedral, and only the celebrants, the priest, the bishop, the singers, 2 or 3, were present. It was such a moving service with absolutely no one present in the congregation, because we cannot be together on this holy day of Palm Sunday. And I found myself weeping during that streaming service, because we are all feeling so fragile right now. We are all feeling the possibility that we could lose someone we love. We could lose many people we don't even know. We could lose the way we have become accustomed to living. We could lose, if we are not careful, our democracy. And so I am feeling very fragile right now, feeling fragile for not only our country, but the world. The president has said he is not going to share resources of the United States with other countries around the world. And for me as a Christian, I mean, the idea of not sharing resources in such a difficult time makes me feel very fragile, because the same could happen in reverse. It could be that the United States falls into such disrepair and such a deep darkness that we need help. We reach out in our own fragility and receive no help because we offered none. So that's how I'm feeling about the word fragile.
This idea of losing people we know and we don't know really fits right into your book, which is originally the reason we were having you come to Nantucket. Your new book, When My Time Comes, Conversations about Whether Those Who Are Dying Should Have the Right to Determine When Life Should End, by Diane Rehm, with a foreword by John Grisham, a fascinating foreword, by the way. Despite the subject matter, I found extremely uplifting and empowering. This book really forced me to begin the conversation with myself.
With yourself.
Which is the first, before you have the conversation with yourself, it's hard to have it with somebody else.
Exactly.
I know you brought your book. I had asked you to bring your book. If you could turn it to the last chapter, which really, really resonated with me, you brought in your grandson. 2 years ago, when you wrote this book, you asked him to start recording your wishes for that event, if the time comes, where you would like to not have any more treatment. And by the way, I should tell everybody, you are a healthy person right now.
Quite healthy, thank God.
Yes. So the fact that you were thinking about this during a healthy period in your life, it really really emphasizes to me how important this is for people to do when they are in that position of strength, to really prioritize what's important. But if you could read that exchange that you had with your 18-year-old grandson and give us the backstory on that, I would appreciate it.
Well, before I begin reading, I want you and everyone watching this to know that the film, the documentary, came first. I began working with the film producer, Joe Fab, and the executive producer, Diane Rehm, about 3 years ago. They came to me after my husband of 54 years, John Rehm, died. He died in 2014. They came to me in 2016 and asked whether I'd be interested and willing to work on this documentary, which they saw as exploring the idea of death with dignity and how important it is to so many people, traveling around the country, talking with everyone from cancer patients to ministers to priests to doctors, everyone associated with life and with death. I then decided, after we had finished doing all these interviews, traveling around the country, to create this book prior to the documentary coming out, which will be in the spring of 2021, coming to public television through WETA television here in Washington. WETA TV will be the distributing station. So what you have in my book are my edits of those transcripts of the interviews I conducted with each and every person in this documentary. And I would also say we conducted about 45 interviews, and I chose 25 to include in this book. So the video, which will come out next year, will give you a firsthand look at all of the people we talked with. And what motivated my saying yes to Joe Fab and Diane Rehm as to my participation in the documentary, which is where it all began. John Rehm and I were married for 54 years. He was the most brilliant man I had ever met, and truly taught me so much about the world. Ben's grandfather, my husband, John Rehm, died of Parkinson's disease, but he wanted to end his life with physician-assisted dying, which was not allowed in the state of Maryland and still is not allowed. The only way he could end his life, pardon me, according to the doctor there in the nursing home, was to stop eating and drinking and taking medication. It took him 10 long days to die. And it was a terrible 10 days for all of us who loved him. The day after he decided that he was going to stop eating and drinking, I came in and he looked wonderful. And I said, my goodness, you look great. What's happened? He said, I have had nothing to eat, nothing to drink, no medication. I have begun the journey. And I am looking forward to the next journey. And he said this with a smile on his face. And it wasn't until 3 or 4 days later that he became comatose. And finally, 10 days, and he was gone. So I have long thought that I did not want to die in a hospital, as my mother did, and then John in that nursing home. But everything crystallized when I began working on the documentary. And Ben, my then 18-year-old grandson, loves to come and visit his grandmother. Now, how lucky am I that an 18-year-old grandson wants to visit with his grandmother? I always have lots going on, and he loves to be here. He was here while we were filming the documentary. And so I called his mother, my daughter, and I said, Jen, I really want to ask Ben to do this. And by this, you'll hear when I read this portion. Do I have your permission? Because you never do anything with your grandchildren without asking parents' permission. And she said, it's up to him, whatever he wants to do. So here is what we did, Michael. I said, Ben, I want to talk with you about something. Do you have your iPhone with you? Yeah. Ben, I'd like you to record our conversation on your iPhone so you have it, your mother has it, your father has it, and your uncle has it. I want Uncle Dave, Aunt Nancy, and my husband now, John Hagedorn. I want them all to have it. I want everybody to know exactly how I feel about what I'd like at the end of life. And Ben said, and you want me to record it? And I said, please, you can start recording now. A few months ago, I said, I came across a perfect paragraph that Anne Morrow Lindbergh had left behind, and her daughter, Reeve Lindbergh, found after her mother died. It just encapsulated so beautifully what I want for myself. And Ben, after I read this, if you have questions, we can talk about it. Is that okay with you? Sounds good to me, he said. Okay, here's what she wrote. Quote, to my family, my physician, and my hospital. If there is no reasonable expectation of my recovery from mental or physical disability, I request I be allowed to die and not be kept alive by artificial means and heroic measures. I ask that medication be mercifully administered to me for terminal suffering, even if it hastens the moment of my death. I hope that you who care for me will feel morally bound to act in accordance with this urgent request. So that's what Anne Morrow Lindbergh wrote. And when I read it, I thought, wow, that's exactly how I feel. If, for example, I develop Alzheimer's disease, and I know that I have Alzheimer's, or you begin to notice, I want you to tell me, Dee Dee, you're failing. You're losing it a little bit. I can see that. I want you to tell me that. I want everybody in our family to tell me that. I want to know when I am failing so that when I reach a point where I know I'm going straight downhill, I want to go peacefully. If I am physically disabled so that I can no longer care for myself, I can no longer feed myself, I can no longer bathe myself or take care of myself in any way, I don't want to be in a nursing home. I want to die peacefully and quietly.
And what do you, boy, Bella waited.
Bella waited.
That's so beautiful. And do you remember what was Benjamin's reaction to that?
I said, now I'm going to arrange for that myself, but what I would really like is for the whole family to be here on that last day of my life so I can be with all of you together. We will laugh. We will enjoy each other's company. We will be with each other in happiness. And then I will go into my bedroom and into my own bed, and I will pass away. And that will be a very happy moment for me if it can happen that way. And of course, I will want John, my husband, to be here as well. He will want to be with me. So I asked Ben, are you okay with that? I'm okay with that, he said. Do you have any questions you want to ask me? Yeah, he said. If you're not physically capable of ending your own life, whose responsibility would it be? And I said, by then, my darling, I figure you will be sufficiently trained as a medical expert to know when my end is coming close.
It's a beautiful exchange. And again, so empowering. I have a 19-year-old son who has a similar relationship with his grandmother. And so I'm going to have him listen to this and read it as well.
I'm so glad. I'm so glad, Michael.
Look who's here.
Benjamin Zide is checking in with us on Zoom. Ben, did you hear me talking about you?
I may have.
I brought Benjamin in. Look, I broke your rule. I did not ask his mother's permission.
How did you get in touch with Benjamin Zide, Michael?
Well, Benjamin, would you like to relay the story?
I'm happy to do so, or you can do so if you'd like.
well, you know what? I will tee you off. I will tee it off. But when I read that, I was so moved by the exchange, and I saw, Benjamin Zide, sophomore at Dartmouth. So I looked him up. I found him on LinkedIn, and I was so thrilled to see where he was doing an internship. And I thought, what an impact. And I want to know, Benjamin, tell us what your internship is and tell us what the connection might be between that interest of yours, because you have a very deep interest in a certain aspect of medicine. So as a sophomore in college, give us a little of the backstory on that.
So about 5 years ago, my grandmother was in a play that focused on a mother-daughter's relationship about Alzheimer's. And they were going around the country giving performances. And when they happened to be in Boston, I attended a party with her where I met an Alzheimer's researcher and interned there for the summer. They focus on clinical trials for the disease and then also more of like the academic research behind it. I did that for summer and then kind of wanted to return for the next year. And they kind of offered me a more permanent position with the group. And I've been doing that now almost for 5 years. So I do have a deep interest in neurodegenerative research, specifically Alzheimer's from that play and that happening that I was very fortunate to have, and has kind of translated into me being a neuroscience major today, and a continued love for the brain.
Wow, that's quite a story, my darling Ben. That play really sparked your interest. That play was written by a dear friend of mine, Trish Vredenberg, who died several years ago of a very, very complicated set of disorders. And it was her mother that I portrayed in this play that we took around the country. And when she died, it broke my heart, really. And I was so glad, Ben, that you and your mother and your dad could be at that play and to hear it performed. It was a reading, Michael, not a performance, but a reading of the play. And Trish and I had worked together to edit that play so that it could be presented as a reading. So
did this play happen while your husband, Ben's grandfather, was still alive?
Yes.
I think by the time you performed it in Boston, he was gone.
He died in 2014. I think you're right, Ben.
It was 2 years after, I think.
I think you're right.
So it's so interesting. So it was the play, not necessarily the exchange you have for this book, that sparked your interest, Ben.
Yeah.
That's so interesting to me. You know what? Why don't you stay on with us? Because I really have one more thing that I want to explore with your grandmother, and it might trigger a question, on your part. But I had emailed your grandmother a few days ago as we were preparing for this, because there was this book that I loved reading to my oldest child. It was called Betsy Tacy. And it's a story about these two girls. They're best friends in their little sort of bucolic neighborhood with, a lot of outdoor play in the unstructured days. It was the turn of the century, late 1800s, early 1900s, based on the author's real life experience. And there's one of the books is called Betsy Tacy, Go Over the Big Hill. And Over the Big Hill was what they considered this strange community that was sort of off limits. The people looked strange. They had come from another country. They didn't really speak English. And the more I looked into it, because I heard the author based it on her real life, it was a beautiful story and a beautiful narrative that ended up happening with this strange community. And Betsy Tacy became great friends with one of the girls there. And it was an Arab American community.
Yes.
And they had come from, it wasn't clear, Syria, Lebanon, those borders were a little fluid.
Yeah.
And then I learned that your grandmother's parents were from, Turkey at the time, but really Syria, correct?
Exactly.
Did you have a chance to read the book, by the way?
I ran through the book to chapter 8, which was the chapter you referred me to. And I was so struck, Michael, because it brought to mind that my father used to call me Ya'aini, which means my eye. And that is what her father in the book called her. And I started crying when I saw that. I've never seen that referred to in writing anywhere else. My eye, he called me Ya'aini.
Well, first of all, did you, how much, Benjamin, do you know about your great-grandparents?
Not a whole lot.
Because I don't know a great deal about them. So poor Ben and Sarah, his sister, are left, and my own children are left not knowing much about their grandparents because they died. I was 19 when my mother died. 11 months later, my father died. And it was, I don't know about you, Ben and Sarah, and how much you ask your parents about their parents, but I had not reached that age where I wanted to say to my dad or my mother, tell me about your life before you came to this country. Tell me about your family, who they were, what they did. The only hint of understanding I have is that they were both, my mother and father were both born in a town in Mersin, in Turkey, called Mersin. And then my father's family went to Beirut, Lebanon. My mother's family went to Alexandria, Egypt. My father came here to this country in 1907, I think, was drafted, became an American citizen, was drafted into the American Army, served in World War I in France, came back to this country, and then went to Alexandria, Egypt in 1929 and plucked my mother out of an engagement. And I have no idea why, or whether there was some kind of family agreement between the two families. I have no idea. She never talked about it. But I think my father promised her the moon when he brought her to this country, and I think she was not a happy woman. She was very sad for a good part of, well, for the life I had with her. I am fascinated that Michael got you into this. I am absolutely amazed at his thorough detective work.
Yeah. Are you all good for me to hang up?
All set.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Benjamin.
Bye.
Bye.
What a surprise.
Diane, so before we leave, I do want to say, so you're wonderful. Somehow you made time to read that chapter. What is the expression again in Arabic? And then how does it translate?
Yeah, Aine. It means my eye.
And so when I first emailed you, I said, it was a quick email late at night, a few nights ago. I said, as a child, did you ever read the Betsy Tacy series of books? And your answer to me was simply, no, I didn't read any books as a child. That really threw me. Most of the authors, most of the people we have at the Nantucket Book Festival, they always talk about the books they read as a child. And here you are. How did that happen? How did you not read books as a child? And when did you start reading them?
There wasn't a single book in our house other than the Holy Bible. There were magazines. There was Life magazine. There was Collier's. I think there was the Reader's Digest, but there were no books. There were school books. And I read so well at kindergarten. Now, don't ask me how, but I read so well at kindergarten that in the first grade, I was asked to read aloud an entire story to the whole elementary school. And that was kindergarten through sixth grade at the time. I don't know how I learned to read. I can only tell you that the library, the public library, was a place of great fear for me because I didn't understand books. And there were so many books, and librarians at that time were of a different ilk. It was, be quiet. Do not make noise. So I went to the library only if I absolutely had to go to the library. And the only books I read were books that we were told to read in school. And I'm talking about textbooks because I never read books as a child. It was only, as I said to you, once I got to the State Department, I started reading. And that's when John Rehm found me reading. I listened to classical music a lot by myself in my bedroom, but I didn't read books.
As we move forward and as we close this conversation, what are you looking to learn now? Because maybe through the lineup of authors at the Nantucket Book Festival, one of those authors might have an answer to something you're curious about. What would you love to learn right now and into this next period of time?
Right now, Michael, where we are in this world with the virus surrounding us, I have made a decision that should I, despite all of the precautions that I have taken, should I contract the virus, I will inform my doctor, but I will not go to a hospital. I feel that that is consistent with what I have learned over the last few years and what I am learning now about how this virus behaves, how it treats both young people and older people, that at 83, I am less likely to survive than a younger person that doctors are going to begin to have to triage and have to ration the equipment that they use, and that someone my age who has fewer years to live, as that person, I would not wish to be in a bed or on a ventilator that could help someone who has a much longer time span ahead. So that's what I'm thinking about right now.
You know, as you say it, just as I said with your book, When My Time Comes, it doesn't sound morose. In fact, as you say that out loud, it seems like your energy level is at least as strong as it was during our whole conversation. It feels to me, from reading your book and from listening to you, like it's almost a source of strength to have that vision for how you want to live when your time comes.
That's exactly right. I want everyone to know that I have had such a fabulous life. I have lived a dream I never thought possible. I have talked to the most interesting people in the whole world. I have 2 beautiful children. I have wonderful grandchildren. I have a husband I married in 2017 who is a retired Lutheran minister who has brought such light to my life. What more could I want? So it feels to me the right way to be thinking right now, as Bella and I enjoy the peace and quiet of this home of ours. Sadly, John is in Florida now and cannot travel. But I'm in great shape and was so looking forward to being with all of you in Nantucket for the book festival. And I had the feeling that this effort on your part to bring writers to not only Nantucket, but to people all around the world could be setting a new precedent for not only Nantucket, but other festivals as well. And I just feel so overjoyed to have been a part of it. Thank you for asking me.
Diane, thank you so much for joining us on At Home with Authors, the Nantucket Book Festival's virtual effort. And Nantucket is waiting for you. And we hope to see you there soon.
Thank you so much.
Thanks so much, Diane.